The fact that something has happened through history tells you absolutely nothing.
We don't even know what the real point of anything is.
Is freedom possible?
Tyranny results when enough good men do nothing.
Why do we accept this concept of money?
It just occurred to me, no more. Don't you think you could organize your own life better? And if you do, let's get on with it.
Rebels, mavericks, dissidents. A variety of terms have been associated with individuals and groups thinking and acting in disaccord with or in direct opposition to the status quo, or what is generally referred to as the system. In times of peace and prosperity, these voices of dissent are often met with contempt, scorn, bewilderment, or simply indifference. Yet in times of war or social, political, and economical upheaval, dissident perspectives gain traction. I embarked on a 7,400-mile journey in search of radical and alternative perspectives on the 21st century. Perspectives ranging from the spiritual to the strictly secular, from the political to the apolitical, and from the profound to the profane. My journey began at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, or more precisely, at the office of renowned linguist and political activist, Professor Noam Chomsky.
Typically, states regard the general population as an enemy. That's normal. The task and role of the population is to be apathetic, obedient, passive. If it's what's called a democracy, they're supposed to show up every once in a while to ratify elite decisions. But if they get involved in anything beyond that, they're causing trouble and they have to be controlled, and they're an enemy. We should bear in mind that we don't have a capitalist system, and no capitalist system has ever survived. It would self-destruct in 5 minutes. So what we have is a kind of state capitalist system, with the state playing a substantial role in American history, a very substantial role in economic development, in production, in research and development, a lot of other bailouts, lots of other devices to keep the private sector viable. So it's a kind of a state capitalist system. So is there an alternative to this? Of course. For example, the alternative that was taken for granted by 19th century workers before it was sort of beaten out of people's heads by massive propaganda. So you go back to the early Industrial Revolution, which was right around here, eastern Massachusetts. It was the period, probably the freest press ever in the United States. There were lots and lots of newspapers representing different ethnic groups, class, workers, all sorts of people. And there was a lot of participation, direct participation, very lively press, widely read, and so on. And if you look at the working class press, they were expressing the common view of working people, namely that those who work in the mills should own them and run them. Yeah, that's very natural. And as I say, we've come close to that a number of times, terrifying to private owners. Wage labor is basically no different from chattel slavery, except that it's temporary. There's nothing holy about wage labor. You are renting yourself, which is not very different from being a slave, except that maybe it'll end sometime. Okay, so those are alternatives. Self-management, democratic control of institutions, whether they're communities or workplaces or any others. Alliances among them, federal arrangements. These are all perfectly feasible alternatives. There's no economic or political theory that tells us there's anything wrong with them. They conflict with the structure of existing power systems, and therefore the educational and cultural system tries to drive them out of your minds and make them seem insane or crazy or unthinkable. But there's nothing unthinkable about them, and you can move towards realizing them.
I'm going to ask the question. Please answer if you can. Is anybody sure and can tell me just what is the soul of a well, what somebody tell me? Answer if you can. I want somebody to tell me.
Anarchism has been vilified as, people throwing bombs, people who want chaos, who want to destroy everything, and so on. And like most propaganda, there's a thread of truth to that. I mean, there are elements of the broad anarchist movement of which that's true. But if you look at the mainstream of the anarchist movement, it's been motivated by quite a different conception. And I think it's a conception that we ought to privilege and be committed to. The basic thought is that if there are systems of structures of hierarchy, domination, oppression, authority, we ought to question them. We ought to ask, are they legitimate? They're not self-justifying. And that's true whether it's a patriarchal family or, somebody a state that runs the world. Anything in between, we always have to ask those questions. Well, can they be justified? It's the adherents of those systems. They're the ones who have to justify it. If they can, okay, I think there are some cases where you can justify authority. If they can't, which is almost all the time, then those structures should be dismantled. Those who believe that you must have a powerful ruling class, they're the ones who have to prove it. Those who question that belief don't have to prove anything. They just say, well, show me your evidence. The fact that something has happened through history tells you absolutely nothing. I mean, throughout almost all of history, women have been subordinated and have no rights, and they're owned by, their husbands or their father or something like that. Well, that's true throughout almost all of history. Of course, not in every social group, but overwhelmingly. Does that mean it can't be changed? Of course it can be changed. In fact, it has been changed radically in the last even in our lifetimes. Slavery was once ubiquitous, and it was not seen as problematic. It was seen as natural. Do we accept slavery as legitimate today? I mean, it still happens. There may be 30 million slaves in the world, but it doesn't have the moral legitimacy that it once had. And the fact that it was that way all through history tells you nothing. That's true of every step towards a more civilized society through history has been argued against on the grounds that it's never been like this. So therefore we have to keep the old forms of authority. So that's not an argument. I mean, if somebody wants to give an argument that we must have a powerful leadership class who controls us, let's wait and hear the argument. You're going to wait a long time because nobody has such an argument.
I saw a crowd standing talking. I just came up in time. Was teaching the lawyer, the doctor. Well, the man ain't nothing but his mind. Well, I want
we could take a lead from Adam Smith in Wealth of Nations, who pointed out that in England, he said, the capital is concentrated in the hands of merchants and manufacturers, and they, therefore, are the principal architects of policy, and they make sure that policy they make sure their own interests are very well cared for by policy, no matter how grievous the effect on the people of England and, of course, the people abroad who are subject to the savage injustice of England and India and so on. That's a good maxim. It carries over the ages. In our society, it's not merchants and manufacturers. It's, especially in the last 30 years, it's financial institutions and multinational corporations, which is the basic core of concentration of ownership of the society. And ownership of the society carries with it virtual ownership of the political system and the intellectual classes. So yes, that's where decisions primarily reside. If you have a good education, you've had it instilled in you that there are certain things it just wouldn't do to say, or to think for that matter. The methods are control of the media by centers of power and wealth and privilege, and the fact that the elite educational system is geared towards inducing conformity. What we call the national interest in the academic world and scholarship is the interest of the privileged sectors. Why is that the national interest? I mean, is it the national interest of the people of the United States to spend as much on the military as the rest of the world combined? And it's not helping the people of the United States. It's very much as Adam Smith described. The national interest is the interest of those who own and fundamentally own the country and pretty much make policy. And the academic world goes along with that. There is what's sometimes been called intentional ignorance. You intentionally don't understand and don't perceive what is threatening to the doctrinal systems to which you're committed. It's common human failing and virtually the definition of the educated classes. The core concept is you have more democracy to the extent that individuals have a greater role in determining their own fate, meaning their own lives, the social decisions, political decisions of larger entities, and so on. To the extent that this increases, you have more democracy. Does the United States support democracy? Of course not. I mean, it's so transparent. You have to be utterly brainwashed not to see it.
Contrary to popular belief, it was not Hamlet who said, "Something is rotten in the state of Denmark." It was the minor character Marcellus who stated the infamous lines in regard to a corrupt political system. As a youngster, I could not have cared less about the struggles of Prince Hamlet, but Marcellus' words struck a chord with me, a chord that would resonate. It began with a sneaking suspicion. At first, I lacked the necessary education and experience to specify where the rot I smelt was coming from and who or what caused it. Yet over time, my suspicion would evolve into a full-blown conviction. Adults and teachers attempted to explain the world's modus operandi to me and how to act and handle myself, yet their lessons did not seem to coincide with my observations. It was not that I suspected the elders and teachers in my community to deliberately lie to me. It was much rather that I felt that they too had been conditioned to believe in a doctrinal system that seemed sanitized, incomplete, or simply false. It also struck me as peculiar that only a selected few seemed to truly benefit from it. At first, I thought I was more or less alone with my skepticism, yet as it turned out, I was simply following in an ancient tradition. I became an agnostic, not in the religious sense, but, as the writer Robert Anton Wilson once said, agnostic about everything. It became clear to me that the social, spiritual, economical, and political doctrinal system was certainly not written in stone. And I found my convictions paralleled when I came across the constructionist philosopher Heinz von Förster, who said, "There are as many truths on this planet as there are people. There is no objective reality. We all create our own." Yet over time, it became apparent to me that the forces governing our lives do exactly that. They define a reality that everyone else is then subjected to. According to Karl Marx, the ideology of the ruling class becomes the ideology of the masses. Perhaps one could go even one step further. The ideology of the ruling class becomes the reality of the masses. Modern societies tend to align themselves according to a class structure. The definition of individual classes is somewhat ambiguous, yet it is reasonably safe to claim that the deciding factors of one's class affiliation are wealth, income, education, culture, and social networks. The abolition of social classes and the establishment of a classless society are the primary goals of communism, libertarian socialism, and most forms of anarchism. The issue of class and class struggle led me to the author of Deer Hunting with Jesus, Dispatches from America's Class War, and Rainbow Pie, a redneck memoir, Joe Bagent. In his two books, Bagent illustrates the lives and struggles of America's permanent poor white underclass, a class that historically provides most of the armed forces and factory laborers. Bagent's primary field of study is Winchester, Virginia, the small town he was born in, left during the hippie era, and returned to 35 years later.
I don't like middle-class people very much. I just don't like them, and it's because of my background. They tend to get smug really fast. Their 401ks are on the backs of my brothers and my father and people like that. It's the reason that they make money in the stock market, because these guys suck shit and beat themselves into the ground all day to make value that other people keep. And that's all I wanted to do. I mean, the editors sort of thought, well, you're trying to inform good West Coast liberals, that have fourth generation going to college and things like that. Well, I had a lot of anger about it. I don't anymore. Like, look, you guys, you've always had it made, and you don't even know it. And you look down on these people. They're my people, and we are a culture. And that's sort of what people took the book to be. I guess it is. I mean, who reads it? Liberals. Certainly my people don't read it. Shit, they don't read anything, ever. So it makes you wonder sometimes why you did it, but because you needed to. You'd hear political noise that is just not true, folks. These guys are not racist. Jesus. Every redneck I know's got like a daughter that married a black guy and all this stuff. I mean, it's just not like that. Not like they think, And so I tried to dispel some of that and also treat the people with humanity, for God's sake. They get up in the morning and they bleed with the rest of us, Try to look at them with a little bit of compassion instead of building a damn wall around them. You do that and the Republicans can stampede them to do anything they want to do. Are you your brother's keeper? Then see to it that they get a damn education. We're into our fifth generation where nobody knows anything, because it's not a caring society. And as long as they're in the worst prison is ignorance. And as long as you let them rot, because I look at it as like when I go to New York or larger urban areas, and I go, you guys got yours. You got yours 3 generations ago while ours were getting their cod shot off in every damn war since the French and Indian War. But you didn't reach out. You didn't do anything for those people. You're perfectly happy to let them be dumb. We are our brother's keeper, and so that's what I felt about that book. For God's sake, it's partly your fault. All the nice, affluent little liberals, it's partly your fault. The spirit of liberalism is caring and equality. And you're not doing any of it. You're investing money. Well, the reason I left the town is I wasn't aware enough to know why, except that I felt stifled. And I also had this great romantic idea that you could go out and make stuff. I'd read On the Road and all that. And I felt like I could just go busting out into America and have wonderful things happen to me, and I could become a better, more interesting life. And I told my wife, my God, we were like 16 years old, 17 and had a kid, 18 living in a hippie school bus. Let's go out west and let's eat beans with cowboys and meet the poets in San Francisco, maybe meet Allen Ginsberg, And we did it. We did it. We got in a Volkswagen and just drove, and we ended up doing all those things and more. And a part of it was, of course, we wanted to. Maybe nobody else in this town wanted to, but we did. It was also an era when you could do it. You could do it. We went out and we made it all happen to us, and we were broke all the time, and everything was always screwed up. And we didn't know, and we didn't care, And that was why I left, and I got everything I wanted when I left. I became friends with all those people. I met the Beats before they died. I took poetry and, experienced more ecstasy than any one man's ever entitled to. Way too much, And then coming back was kind of an interesting thing because, of course, you changed, like Kesey used to say about drugs, when you get the message, hang up the phone. Well, when an LSD trip starts repeating itself, Jesus Christ, for all the variety it's in it, and now there are reruns, time to hang up the phone, And then the big yuppie age was coming on, and frankly, that was pretty damn cool, and then I started making really good money because I was a seasoned writer and a seasoned editor, and I had a real good gut for what people would read. I'd been around some of the best writers in the country just hanging out, so I was learning a lot of stuff. And so I became really straight for almost 20 years, or while you're raising your kids, you know, paying child support for a while and all that stuff. And over time, I kept looking around at the urban society I was living and working in, and my wife and I would talk about it. Like, we go out for drinks with these people. They're supposedly our friends. They're not even colleagues. They never say anything interesting. All we do is buy stuff and go on trips and all this stuff. And it was getting really, really empty because I had had the warmth of an Appalachian childhood, whatever you think it is. It's very warm and connective and real. So I came back here. Politically, it's still hell. It's absolute hell. It's an ignorant goddamn place, but it's my place. And like I was telling you, the ghosts of old girlfriends, and my father, my ancestors, they're on these streets. I walk down the alley behind Main Street and I get all choked up every time. It was the alley I played in when I was a kid. I see houses, I delivered newspapers, you know, on summer evenings, and all my ghosts are here. The ghost of my youth is here. So I wanted to come back. I started realizing that. I realized that I came from a bunch of people that had a chain of history. They know. It's like people used to say, how come you Southerners have so many cousins? I said, we don't. We just happen to know their names, you know? And so I look around and I just know these people. I know what their grandfather did. I know how stupid they are if they get drunk, and how this one will cheat you, and how she used to be a beauty queen. I was lonely and poor on this corner selling papers. And after a long time out west, I started realizing that was a life, buddy. That was human. And I wanted it again.
Some blues are just blues, mine are the miner's blues. Some blues are just blues, mine are the miner's blues. My troubles are coming by threes and by twos.
If you look at what feudal lords did, you know, they didn't really, it's not like the movies. They didn't push anybody around. They simply had many ways to extract the surplus productivity of the serfs, some very direct and some indirect. And if you look today, that structure is not much different than credit. It's not much different than a credit card or a mortgage. It's just that the fundamental operations of it, you know, they're by law and so on, and so nobody sees it. Nobody sees that capitalism is an extractive wine press. It presses money out of people. I think that once they convinced people they were consumers, they didn't realize they were serfs. Well, I'm getting something for all this. Well, they don't call it compensation for no reason at all. Your life, you're being compensated for not having a life. When I sort of came out on the other side and realized it's only the end of the world, it's only the end of the world, and there's not much you're going to be able to do about it, accepting that alone, that it is over, baby. I mean, this is the fifth big die-off, and we're in it, you know, and there's not anything anybody's going to do about 6 billion people, soon to be 13 within 25 years or whatever. You can't beat that. You can't beat the odds. You can't beat what's going to happen to the planet, what's already happening. Once I came out the other side of that, I was really surprised. I was no longer angry, drinking, depressed, like burn it down or something. And I realized that there was a self going on that I had not heard since I was a little kid, playing alone in the woods. By golly, there's a little self in there, and that self is a constant. Own your own consciousness, because that's what's going on. People do not own their own consciousness. And the reason I'm so terribly aware of it is I came from, I took 200 acid trips for starters, and I'm really interested in the subject of consciousness. And at least about 500,000 people in my generation were, you know, everybody. If ever real estate agent that says he was a hippie was, we'd have won, you know. But the thing is, there are about 500,000 people that cared about human consciousness, And we're trying to understand how it worked, because it is the key to everything. For all the good that the Age of Enlightenment was, it did not need to come to scientism. You know, the scientists did not have to own the absolute, they're always right and we're always wrong. Well, wait a minute here, let's back up a little bit. You know, all you've done is screw up and threaten the human race. And the belief in reason and all that, you can carry it too far. I mean, where's the mystery in your heart? We're more than a sum total of what we can think and what we can do. And I think that they've denied the best part of human beings by saying, well, it's not correct, or it's, you know, oh, it's soggy. Well, it doesn't make sense. It's mystical. It's spiritual. Oh, it's that spiritual crap. Man, that's the best part of yourself there, and it can never be explained. It can never be defined well enough. And throwing that away has just been one huge mistake.
As a force in history, beliefs are often more important than facts, and facts are often curtailed, sanitized, or simply falsified to serve political interests. This phenomenon is often referred to as historical engineering. George Orwell pointed out, who controls the past controls the future, and who controls the present controls the past. He continued by stating, past events have no objective existence, but survive only in written records and in human memories. The past is whatever the records and memories agreed upon. And since the past was erased, the erasure was forgotten. The lie became the truth. The issue of historical truths and lies led to Shawnee State University in Ohio and to maverick academic and author Dr. Mark Mirabello, a man specializing in outlaw history and the frontiers and margins of human civilization.
The modern economy is essentially based on medieval vices. The Middle Ages said that greed was bad, but here to accumulate wealth is good. Medieval society said that cooperation is good and competition is bad. And here we would say again that competition, the market forces, these things are good. Medieval society had the concept of the just price, that, for example, wheat or, frankly, a pair of shoes should be X amount of wealth. And when they developed shortages in the Middle Ages, they kept the prices at a certain level. Now, they understood that if you have a crop failure and you keep wheat at the same price, everybody has the opportunity of buying this at that price. Whereas in our system, the market force, if you have a crop failure, again, something, it goes up in price, and who gets the final product? The wealthy.
Closely bunched, the 9 thoroughbreds show their liking for today's track, which is dry and fast. No matter how you look at it, this is one of the races of the year. Tide Rips is taking the lead. Revenson is second, Faultless is fifth, and Phalanx is last.
Gambling is a medieval vice, and I have to confess, I mean, I invest in stocks myself, but essentially what the stock market represents is essentially playing the horses for the middle and upper classes. For example, if I invest X dollars of Ford Motor Corporation, I'm not really performing any real labor, but I'm expecting a payment, which in Aristotle's mind, he argued that usury was actually, and the Middle Ages agreed with this, interest on money is actually a form of theft, because the person who loans the money is not really, or should say lends the money, is not really actually doing anything to make the wealth increase. So I would say, again, our modern economy is this network of medieval vices. We call it capitalism. And certain people know the rules of the game and can profit from it. And then the sort of commoners know very little and can make limited amounts. Now, as to this notion, why do we accept this concept of money? It's regrettably, humans like to think that they question things, but they really don't. It reminds me, as a university professor, I noticed that this concept endlessly, students come into university thinking that the word skeptic means disbelieving in religion. But the original Greek Hellenistic philosophical school of skepticism argued that all knowledge is uncertain and that the wise man suspends judgment on all issues, even his own existence. So the same student will disbelieve in a God figure or his local Christian church or his synagogue or his mosque, but he readily believes in the currency, he readily believes in Darwin, he readily believes in quantum theory, relativity theory, economic theory, sociological theory, and it's really curious to me. So we teach these things in Economics 101, and they're taken as facts. Americans literally believe, for example, they'll routinely refer to the President of the United States as the most powerful man in the world. And Americans literally believe this. The general notion is the United States is a democracy. Now, according to ancient Greek definitions of democracy, we are not, because demos means people, but the poor people. There are only really two types of people, the rich and the poor. Someone can't be rich and poor at the same time. So society aligns itself along these lines. A 1920s economist had argued that there are really just two types of wealth, virtual wealth and real wealth. But in our modern culture, too much wealth is becoming essentially virtual, as opposed to, shall we say, literal wealth. And indeed, the people producing the real wealth are, in a sense, losing their jobs. Money is an intriguing concept. By the way, as a historian, we can always tell the heart of a society by looking at its largest monuments. In ancient Egypt, the Great Pyramid of Khufu is built for the concept of the afterlife. In the medieval period in Europe, the largest structures are churches for spirituality. But in New York, of course, they were the World Trade Center, the World Trade Towers, a, frankly, cathedral to wealth. Now, in earlier times, you could argue that all paper money, and of course the Chinese invent the concept of paper money in the Middle Ages, although in that case, the Chinese emperor got the concept, I will pay my bills by making these pieces of paper, and you must accept them on penalty of death. In later times in the West, the notion was that paper symbolized gold or silver. In this country, in the United States, in the 17th century, they would issue paper money based on land. Now, when you get to the 20th century, a really peculiar development occurs, is we've gone back to the Chinese concept of so-called fiat money. It's only backed, well, frankly, it only has value because people believe it has value. The American dollar technically has no value intrinsically whatsoever. However, I accept it because I know someone else down the road will take it from me. And we're running into problems because at some point, if there's a kind of economic dislocation, you could have rather easily the collapse of a currency. So oddly enough, for an age of disbelief, the 21st century is the great age of skepticism and disbelief. Our entire modern economic system is based on faith. All power is based on public opinion. That as long as the people give someone power, that person has authority. The Mexicans actually refer to the American two-party system as the beast with two heads. The ruling elite divides itself artificially into two sporting teams, in which essentially they argue over trivial issues while essentially agreeing on the mass. And because they appear to be arguing, it creates the illusion of dissent and change. The obedience here, and again I'll use a Huxley concept. Huxley referred to the concentration camps of the future, that essentially through propaganda, or you can call it public relations, pharmaceutical drugs that alter behavior, and frankly educational systems, the concentration camps of the future will be voluntary. People will actually embrace the system. We forget that enslaved peoples often embrace the slavery because they know nothing else. The notion that is freedom possible, and rather oddly enough, I'd have to say that typically it's possible with the people outside the law, which essentially is why we call them outlaws. We forget that in the ancient world, you could travel beyond a certain frontier and be in a completely lawless region, where essentially there's no police to call, no military. It's your own right arm with your sword that defends you, your bow and your arrow. If you wanted food, you had to gather it yourself. But by the late 19th century after Christ, in fact, even today, there's really no place to go. If we go back to what was 99.9% of human history, the hunting and gathering stage, only the strong survived, and frankly, their raw power kept them alive. Those people were equipped to deal with pure freedom and, frankly, anarchy. Today, almost all of the people in the West have been, frankly, raised like hothouse vegetables. We're not really exposed to the real sun, to real storms, and I think we've probably lost the ability to function in these settings. So we talk about them, but we would quickly die. Anyone who builds a bunker, anyone who puts radical literature on the back of their Dodge truck, anyone who basically writes radical letters to editorial pages of letters, who chats on radical websites will be found. So perhaps the answer for freedom in the future is simply, again, keeping a low profile. To me, ideas are not treasures to basically be embraced or buried. What's important is the open-ended quest for knowledge. And if you have something that's really important, what you think of as freedom is not simply enjoy it, but frankly, go on and find even a better and more interesting form. But I think freedom by definition is ephemeral. It's not going to last.
One often hears, you have no choice but to be part of the system, since only within the system can one acquire life's essentials, food, medication, and shelter. One does not necessarily have to be very imaginative to envision a scenario in which one supplies one's own food by growing it and attempting to heal one's maladies through alternative medicine. But what about shelter? The mountains of northern Idaho are home to underground architect, author, and diehard hippie Mike Oler, who in 1968 purchased 40 acres of land and began building underground houses. The basic principle of the underground house is that it is incorporated into Mother Earth, either partially or completely. The advantages are astounding. It is warm in winter and cool in summer. It is environmentally sound. It uses half the building materials a regular home requires. It is fire-resistant, radiation-resistant, and is impervious to tornado and hurricane-strength winds. In addition to his books on underground housing, Oler has been the author of a variety of books in which he deals with physical and spiritual survival tactics, emphasizing spirituality as the antidote to materialism.
Oh, Lord, you know I have no friend like you. As heaven not my home. Oh, Lord, what shall I do? And love one beckons me from heaven. Welcome, no, I can't feel at home in this world anymore. This world is not my home. I'm only passing by. My treasures and my hope, you're lit up all night. All of my kindred gone on before. I can't.
The hippies had it right all along. All this hot enthusiasm for healing the planet and eating whole foods and avoiding chemicals and working with nature and developing the self came from the hippies. Alternative health, hippies. Green cotton, hippies. Reclaimed wood, recycling, humane treatment of animals, medical pot, alternative energy, natural childbirth, non-GMO seeds, came from the granola types. So I have no apologies for being a hippie then and being a hippie now. When I moved up here to Idaho, I kind of snuck in. Rather than have long hair and a beard, I went to a barber in southern Idaho and had him trim my hair short and shave my beard. So I came in looking like what I also was, which was a guy just off the boats. Well, not just off the boats, but a commercial fisherman, because one of the ways I made the down payment on the land was working the fishing boats in Alaska for 2 seasons. And they liked that up here. They respected that very much, because commercial fishing is every bit as dangerous as logging. Those are the 2 most dangerous professions in the United States. And they knew there were other people who once in a while would go up to Alaska and work the boats, and they knew that was incredibly tough work. And so at first I was welcomed, and then there was the turning point came when the governor came up to do a town meeting, and I stood up and I asked him. I said, the country was torn apart by the war and by the resistance to the war, the Vietnam, and resistance to Vietnam, and there was all kinds of violence and so on and so forth. I stood up in the town meeting and I said, Governor, the politicians in America don't understand the youth of America now. And I think, sir, that you could make a big difference if I could come down to Boise and you'd spend a couple hours with me, and I will explain to you where the youth is, and we've got some answers how to placate the youth. And he was totally shook by this, and the newspaper ran an article in which it said that one apparently hippie person stood up and asked the governor to spend 2 hours of his time to hear his problems, which was not to hear the nation's problems is what it was, but they made it my problems. So that was a turning point. There were death threats. There were rumors going around that I was about to be burned out, so on and so forth. And what saved me, I do believe to this day, was the fact that some of the Vietnam vets coming back moved onto my land in a school bus, and they knew what BS the society was who had sent them over there to do that incredibly vile killings over in Nam. And these guys, the Vietnam vets, were heroes in town, and they didn't want to have anything to do. They wouldn't go into the American Legion Hall. They wouldn't go into the VFW. They moved onto my land, and these guys were a pretty wild bunch. People were afraid of these guys, and that's what saved my butt. I was the first hippie who wasn't run out of town, and then all of a sudden, around that time, the hippies started piling in, and there were communes in the county and so forth. Before I get out another sentence, let me state that I am one poor person to be preaching spirituality. I have lusted all my life. I have frequently gotten drunk. I have abused drugs. I have coveted material things. I have been vindictive, arrogant, envious, jealous, egotistical, and otherwise mean-spirited. So I'm not going to preach. What I will do is tell you some of the spiritual paths that I found that have helped me greatly. Spirituality is the ultimate survival skill. When one is primarily on a spiritual quest, the desire for material objects is effectively lessened. This can make an enormous difference to us in the coming trials, since we stand a big chance of losing many of our goodies. Material goodies are to Americans as alcohol is to a drunk. Buddha taught that only in the cessation of desire is happiness possible. Emerson and Thoreau were both influenced by Hinduism. Thoreau, knowing how practical his fellow Americans were, attempted to express the logic of reduced desire in a practical way, to show that it made life better even for selfish reasons. He suggested that happiness is the result when achievements were divided by desires. If one's desires are great, unhappiness and disappointment are almost inevitable. The better solution is to reduce desires. As this is done, the figure for happiness rises. In Buddhism and Hinduism, this is enlightenment, liberation, or nirvana, the goal of life. One night in 1968, it just occurred to me, no more. I cannot live in the cities anymore. I wanted to move to the country. I wanted to move to Montana, west of Glacier National Park, and I wanted to build a cabin and grow a garden and just live the simple life. Well, I did. But the really fascinating thing is the same decision occurred to hippies all across America, and I think probably to hippies in Europe and so forth too. And those who weren't going to get out of the city didn't think that they could or whatever. They were digging up the backyards and planting vegetables. They were digging up the parks in the cities and planting vegetables for everybody. If I was going to pass on any what I consider wisdom that I've learned in my years of experience here and elsewhere, is go for the spiritual. That's what we're here on earth for, and learn to find a path where you can return to God. Somehow, we've got to clear away in our minds the belief that we are separate from God, and that this is reality. This is not reality. Reality is being with God.
term protest simply means a strong reaction to an event or situation. Protesters may organize to publicly, and sometimes forcefully, make their opinions heard in an attempt to influence public opinion or government policy. And that is exactly what occurred on May 13th, 1960, the day that would later be referred to as Black Friday.
If you think that I am going to cooperate with this collection of Junises, of men who sit there in violation of the United States Constitution, if you think I will cooperate with you in any way, you are insane.
Open the door! Open the door! Open the door! Open the doors! What are you afraid of? Open the doors! Here comes the goose squad! This is Americanism! Watch this Americanism in action! Wow! Watch this Americanism in action! Watch this Americanism!
The late 1950s and early 1960s were an age of conformity. Senator Joe McCarthy was spearheading the House Subcommittee on Un-American Activities on their communist witch hunt, fueled by the so-called Red Threat and the fear of nuclear war. On said Friday, May 13th, students of the University of California in Berkeley gathered to peacefully protest against the House Subcommittee, which turned into a so-called riot. Black Friday was the second day of hearing by the House Subcommittee, which had been holding public investigations into communist infiltration of unions, the film industry, and the teaching profession. 64 students, including Albert Einstein's granddaughter, Evelyn, were arrested, but nobody was convicted, and the so-called riot may well have changed history. Black Friday was the death blow to the House Subcommittee on Un-American Activities, paved the way for public dissent, and became known as the day that made the 60s possible. The assumed ringleader that day was an unassuming Nebraska farm boy, Bob Meisenbach.
Shave my head, finish your hand, will it become an natural man? If I had my way, but if I had, I would be the wild if I had a long drive.
The House Un-American Activities Committee brought their roadshow to San Francisco looking for un-Americans and cheap publicity. They rounded up the usual suspects, put them on display. A little public scorn never hurt anybody, if you exclude the suicides. And nailing commies can get you reelected to the lower house of reprehensibles, especially down south. It was bad timing. We in the silent generation suddenly got loud and demanded to be heard in the hearings. The committee heard us singing, "We shall not be moved," and called the cops. They moved us. A riot ensued. Bedlam broke out at City Hall. Fire hoses, bruises, banged heads, slipping and sliding. She and I were arrested along with 65 other students. So here's the deal. She goes scot-free, I go to trial. It was the cops, the committee, and J. Edgar Hoover versus me. Not a fair fight. I won and became a passing celebrity in the fickle press. They got it all wrong again. When I was first charged, I was a devil, guilty as sin. Later, when the not guilty verdict came down, an angel of innocence I became. That was the onset of the wild 60s. Illusion, confusion were everywhere. Camelot died with Kennedy. Bobby and Martin went down too. The decade of hope turned to decay. A dichotomy of cynicism ruled the day. Woodstock, Altamont, flower children, Manson family, hippies, street people, drugs overdosing, free love, STDs, picketing, mobs, passive resistance bombs, And the Vietnam War just wouldn't go away. Got worse and worse every day. Half blind then, now I think I see. We were treading the edge of history and never looked over to the abyss below. We paid then and are paying still. That decade is with us today. My students sometimes ask me what I did during the 60s. I tell them I started the 60s. They don't believe that. So then I tell them about the time I was in jail with Einstein's granddaughter. They don't believe that either. Good thing they weren't my jury.
I intend to give the American people the cold, documented picture of the sellout in Korea, the extent to which communism has been directing our foreign policy, our suicidal foreign policy, if you please. And if the American people want more of that, then they can vote for the present administration.
McCarthy came along at a time when he could exploit that age of conformity by exposing people as being out of the mainstream. And I believe it was Edward R. Murrow who said about television, he said one time, this medium can give information, it can teach, it can even inspire, but it'll only do so to the extent that we make it do so. And he came out against Joe McCarthy and helped bring his ruin. What does the phrase? Eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. You always have to be aware if somebody is trying to control you. Your freedom is always in danger. When you get elected to office, you have power. And power means you can tell people what to do. And a lot of people who want to tell you what to do don't want to tell you what's best for you or the country. It's just what their personal interests are. Well, someone said, I'm not sure who, could even have been the Godfather, that I would rather be the kingmaker than the king. Forces behind the setting up of a political regime is generally money. Money rules the world. There's no idea that can compete with a dollar whose time has come. We're a materialistic country. I think the world is materialistic. Karl Marx was a materialist. His philosophy was dialectical materialism. Hegel turned upside down. It's funny, communism would disappear in Eastern Europe and then in the Soviet Union. And you'd think the world would be a better place. But money came in and did as much damage to the capitalist system as the communist ever did. Edmund Burke, who criticized the French Revolution, he said, I think tyranny results when enough good men do nothing. And you always have to have the forces of good who are prevailing over the forces of evil, because when you have more thieves than you have honest workers, you got a problem. Yeah, well, there's a poem in which I've forgotten the title of the poem and I've forgotten the author, but they're driving through these frogs, I think, in Florida that are crossing the road, and the father gets out and is taking some of the frogs off the road, and His son says, "What are you doing, Dad? You can't save them all." And he says, "I can save some." And that's what you do. You do what you can. It's when you don't do what you can, that's when you've disappointed yourself and others. I used to argue with fundamentalists, but I just tell them now that when they want to talk about God, I just say, God is a metaphor. It's just our way of talking about the mystery of the universe, which affects us all. Some people go for a simplistic answer of fundamentalism. Others go for more sophisticated philosophies. I just go for the metaphor. I figure God is the embodiment of all the mystery of the universe. And as for obeying God, you better obey the mystery of the universe, because it'll eliminate you quickly if you don't go along with it.
Alternative or independent media in publishing not only refers to media that differs from mainstream media, that one could argue primarily serves the economic, social, and political interests of the establishment. It can also mean alternative in regards to the hierarchical structure of a publishing company, radio station, or record label. In a worker-run collective, all decisions are made by the collective. All labor, from designing book covers to sweeping floors, is done collectively, and everyone receives equal wages. Anarchist book publisher and founder of AK and PM Press, Ramsey Kanaan, and his wife, writer, journalist, and host of KPFA's radio show Against the Grain, Sasha Lilley, invited me to Oakland, California, to discuss a variety of issues dealing with collective action and mutual aid.
Think about this moment when media is in such crisis in this country, when newspapers are closing left and right, where public radio is in crisis, where publishing is in crisis, bookstores are disappearing. Yet here is the station, which has been here on the air for 61 years, founded by anarchist pacifists who were conscientious objectors during World War II and were interned. And they believed that there was a profound need to create a medium that could be critical of war, that could be critical of commercial interests, of the corporate hold. And they formed this station to do it. It's still here, alive and kicking, 61 years later. But in a time when media is in such profound crisis, KPFA matters more than ever. Think about what you have heard on Against the Grain, the radical ideas, the perspectives on political economy, on philosophy, on sociology, on issues of gender and race and empire. Really, this station is a 61-year-old experiment in mutual aid of us saying, no, I understand that I don't necessarily have to, pay some kind of toll to turn on my radio and hear what's on the air, but I realize that what I get is absolutely determined by the funding. And so much of the media in this country is absolutely determined by corporate and governmental interests. And if you believe that something else should be there, then you want to be part of preserving that. Do your part right now. Step up and support KPFA. My program is kind of a mechanism for disseminating ideas by people who really are utterly shut out of, let's just say, the mainstream discourse. Marxists, anarchists, others on the radical left. And it's a place to have debate and the dissemination of ideas around all sorts of things, geography, philosophy, economics, political economy is a really core dimension of it, and particularly in this moment of crisis. I would say that these ideas are as important as they've ever been, and it's been crucial to be able to get them out.
People of whatever ideology have all kinds of things in common, undoubtedly. The biggest one is we all live under this capitalist system, and it is in none of our interests, i.e. we don't benefit from it, whatever the system tells us, and in whatever ways the system attempts to divide us or pretend that we're different. We're of a different skin colour, we have different beliefs, we worship a different god. That may or may not all be true. Nevertheless, none of us benefit from this system. We certainly have that in common, and to me that would be the common way of organising with anyone. Actually, don't you think you could organise your own life better? And if you do, let's get on with it.
We're going to walk together. We're going to stand together. We're going to sing together. We're going to stay together. We're going to moan together. We're going to groan together. And after a while, we'll say, freedom, freedom, freedom now!
Especially the concept of DIY, do it yourself, actually doesn't mean doing it oneself. DIY always meant and always means doing it in concert with others. So I came out of punk rock in the late 70s and early 80s. Punk rock championed an ethos of doing it oneself, DIY. The phrase was coined or certainly repopularized out of punk rock. It meant we organized our own concerts, we organized our own tours, we organized our own fanzines, we squatted venues, we did everything ourselves. But it wasn't me doing everything myself, it was me doing it as part of this wider punk rock movement, that we were doing it ourselves. So in response to the question of how would an individual respond to feeling powerless or the oppression of family or the state or society, I would say the first thing to do is to try and find like-minded individuals so that together you can do it yourselves and change things. I was not the only punk in Stirling, this small town in central Scotland, 20,000 people. There were a few punks. Actually, there was a lot of punks. There was very few who had ideas similar to mine that were political. But nevertheless, not only did we come together and organise our own concerts or whatever, but through the mail, through pen pals, through, I wrote off for cassettes in those days of other bands. I ordered fanzines from all over the world. So I wasn't alone. I may have been one of the few people that thought like me in Stirling, but actually I wasn't alone. And I could act and gain sustenance and strength from people all over the world who were doing similar things or thought in similar ways or had similar problems or anxieties or concerns about the way the world is organised.
I'm skeptical of individual solutions. Situated as I am in the United States, where there's a very deep strain of individualism historically. Oftentimes when society feels oppressive to people, they withdraw and take individual action. And there's, the joke is in the United States, you can find 50 people doing anything you can think of. Whatever it is, 50 people somewhere in the US are doing it. And I think actually, although this tendency runs very strongly throughout US history, I think it's become particularly pronounced over the past quarter century, a bit longer too, because in the last sort of period of real collective social upheaval in the 1960s and 1970s, there was a sense that you could change society together. And yet at the same time, there was also a very strong ethos of the importance of individual freedom, of self-expression, and so on. But I think the way that kind of unfolded as it's not surprising that social movements ebb and flow, that, there are moments of upheaval and then moments of retrenchment. Unfortunately, what we've seen in the past quarter century in this country is, a quarter century of retrenchment. And I think a lot of this has to do with the fact that although there was this collectivist spirit in the 60s in the New Left, there was also this very strong individualistic strain that I will define freedom myself, I'll find my own personal freedom, I'll go off and do my own thing. And unfortunately, I think that ended up giving heft and momentum to the new way that capitalism reorganized itself, starting in the 1970s, which, oftentimes gets termed neoliberalism, very much based on the notion of the free market, unfettered, of individuals maximizing their self-interest, leading to the greatest satisfaction for everyone. What should someone do right now if they feel the oppressive boot of society upon them is to resist that impulse, to pull into oneself, to go off and join that 50 other people doing their one esoteric thing and think about social change and collective action, because that's very much what's missing from any kind of radicalism in this country now. And I think it's left to all sorts of very fragmented solutions.
I think what the capitalism in the state and those in authority have always been very fearful of and have always acted against consistently is actually people coming together. The mob, the crowd, has always been demonized. Places where people gather together, again in Britain that would be the pub or the tavern or the trade union meeting. Wherever people come together, the state is trying to separate, to control, to corral, to limit what the group can do. A mob is a bad term. There's never a good mob. It's never a convivial gathering. It's always a mob. It's, they're unruly, they're uncontrollable, they're out of hand, they're criminal. So again, whenever people come together, the state tries to control it, to regiment it, to document it, to criminalize it. There has to be now CCTV cameras in every public space. Why? We're afraid of people coming together in a public space. Public spaces themselves are increasingly limited, closed down, enclosed. There's no longer public lands, there's no longer public spaces. Wherever people come together, that is seen in itself as a threat.
No matter what your purpose is, you must leave. If you do not disperse, you may be arrested and or subject to other police action. By order of the City of Pittsburgh Chief Police, I hereby declare this to be an unlawful assembly.
Anarchism has always been the foe of authority, of injustice, and likewise, if authority accepts that there is a battle, there is a war, which again those in power have always been well aware that there is a war going on and they intend to win it. So unsurprisingly, throughout the history of the use of the term, anarchy and anarchism was used in a political context. Over the last 150 years, those that actually call themselves anarchists have been implacable foes of authority in any shape or guise. So it should be no surprise to anyone that, of course, authority is going to belittle it, besmirch it, deliberately misrepresent its ideas. Why would it do anything else?
There is a ruling class. That ruling class is composed of those who stand to benefit most from capitalism. But I don't think that necessarily means that power is exercised in secret behind closed doors and there are shadowy forces that we just, can't understand pulling the strings. A lot of it's very transparent. A lot of it's just very obvious. That doesn't make it any less noxious or frightening.
It's not that the mainstream media are some craven lackeys who are solely out to exploit everyone and they've been bought off and given us slightly few more crumbs of the pie. It's actually they genuinely believe that that's the way the world works, and that the way the world currently works is correct and just and right and the way it ought to be. If one didn't believe that what the information they were giving out was correct, they wouldn't get to that position. They would have been weeded out, or they would have given up long before they got to that position where they're giving out that kind of information. Power exists and perpetuates itself largely because most people think that that's the way it ought to be, that's the way it should be, and perhaps most important of all, that's the only way it could be. To think of any alternatives is actually almost beyond comprehension.
I knew prior to my departure that I would not reach a sense of completion. In a sense, I knew I would fail. My journey would simply be another chapter of an ongoing odyssey for myself and others who refuse to believe that what is cannot be another way. However, fact was, for the moment, my journey was coming to an end, and I had simply planned to spend a few days with my friend, folk singer and cattle rancher, Will the Bull Taylor, and his family on their farm outside of Knights Ferry, California. As it turned out, it was going to be Will and his love of music and the game of catch who would write the final chapter of my journey.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you. Oh, it smells like...
Spiders.
Yep, and wasps.
Getting worked on. Just trying to be really still. Like when I get splinters out of your skin. Got it?
Hey, little buddy. Got it.
Is that it?
Yep. Yeah. I was born and raised in the hills here in California. My family, long line of cattle ranchers and baseball players. If I was to have a religion, it would probably be the philosophy and the religion of baseball. Baseball is perfect. Let's just even strip it down. Playing catch is perfect. It started with a wave, you know, another person waves, you know, and that's where it's like, hey, what's up, man? What's going on? And it's like you throw a comment out, hey, man, what's going down? And then the other person's like, yeah, what's going down? And that's catch. And so it's like, oh, I'm going to steal your car. I'm gonna steal your car. It's karma, man. You know, like throw, catch, throw, receive, give, receive, give, receive. And when you learn how to play catch, it's so simple. Give, receive. Where it gets beautiful is you have to trust, man. You just have to let it go. You can't force what this other person's gonna throw you. You just have to catch it. It's this air. Like, it's a stillness. It's we all have it. It's this beautiful stillness. And once we build all these bricks around it, we don't even know what we're doing anymore. We don't even know what the real point of anything is. When it's just a chill, you know? Being a part of this whole system, being a part of having a bank account, having a cell phone, and how it rolls these days, I just can't get into it, man. I like the dirt. I like the things that are old, man. I like leather. I like leather shoes. I like a good pair of leather boots, an old baseball glove, like things that are you can smell and touch. And these contraptions, I just don't dig it, man. I mean, people, I see what's going on with them. You know, I mean, I understand the purpose of a lot of these things, but I still like building my life on things that I can touch and talk to and feel. We're not slaves to anything, and everything's ran by us, the masses. Like, this whole system is ran by us. And so that when we think that we have to do and be something, man, we could do and be anything we want. That's the reality. That's the honest truth of it all. So when I've always grown up and somebody says, man, sorry, bro, I can't do that. Like, what do you mean I can't do that? Like, what do you mean that's not going to work? Like, it's going to work. Watch me. And, you know, sometimes it doesn't work. And sometimes you show somebody, wow, man, I never saw that before. And that's the fun part of life. Is like, I've never seen that before, man. That was far out. That's good. And that's why I like songwriting. That's why I like poetry. I like the arts. Because you have such a beautiful chance to show people something they've never seen before. Well, when we moved out to where we live at the farm now, the tea farm, I started calling it the tea farm. And so when I meet people, they like, oh, what do you grow, man? And the wife says, oh, we grow love and music. And that's kind of how we do it. We have to go within, man. That's all there is to it. We have to go within, and we have to create something that brings joy to your soul. Like, and the more that you don't do it and you play in this giant system, the more you're not going to survive, man. It's going to eat you up. Like, you call the shots. We call our shots, man. So why not have a hell of a game? I mean, dazzle it, baby. Dazzle it. Some mountains and men are bigger than you think. Some rivers so fast, hell, you can't take a drink. Some burdens so heavy, you can't help but sink in that ocean with the chains on one too many link. I'm a laid back one, and I've been one so long. I ain't perfect, you can tell by my songs. Brothers, forgive me for all of my wrongs. The good Lord, He's calling, and it's time to go home. Say what you will and do what you must. That rain's coming soon, boys, gonna clear up this dust. And I ain't had a home in so very long, but I'm heading to the house, boys, I'll leave the light on. 'Cause I'm a laid-back one, and I've been one so long. I ain't perfect, you can tell by my songs. Brothers, forgive me for all of my wrongs. The good Lord, He's calling, and it's time to go on home. I wore out my shoes in that wrong way to run. I blistered my skin working hard in the sun. Supper's almost over and I done cleaned my plate, and there's a light shining yonder, boys, I don't think I'll wait. I'm a laid-back one, and I've been one so long. I ain't perfect, you can tell by my songs. Brothers, forgive me for all of my wrongs. The good Lord, He's calling, and it's time to go home. I hear Him calling, and it's time to go home. Don't believe in your preaching, don't do what I'm told. I got a different way of living out here in the cold. Don't want your congregation, don't want to be a no fold. I don't want to go right, I ain't gonna. 'Cause you're right kind of living ain't right for me in this burned out, broke down society. Live my life alone and be free, but I don't want to go right, I don't want to. Don't want to live my life, the lady by my side, someone to have a hold, then to watch her die. I'll just ride my pale horse alone into the sky. Don't want to go right, I ain't gonna. 'Cause you're right kind of living ain't right for me in this burned out, broke down society. Live my life alone, be free. I don't want to go right, I don't want to. Don't want your whiskey, bourbon or gin. Don't believe in your revolution, don't believe in your sin. With a fire in my heart will see me to the end. I don't want to go right, I ain't gonna. 'Cause you're right kind of living ain't right for me in this burned out, broke down society. Live my life alone and be free. Well, I don't want to go right, I don't want to. Don't want to go left, don't want to go right. Don't need your directions to guide me to the light. Well, some folks think I'm crazy, and maybe I just might. I don't want to go right, I don't want to. 'Cause you're right kind of living ain't right for me in this burned out, broke down society. Live my life alone and be free. Well, I don't want to go right. I don't